be a legal mechanism that is contractually obligating the parties involved on an IPO to transfer. What are they concerned about transferring and getting control of? It's the actual stock, the original virgin company developed, generated, and issued stock, which all of us who have formed corporations have done. The difference is, for those of us who have never gone public, we've never been in this situation. But most large companies in this nation use some sort of public offering. Now, the IPO is the most frequently used, and what happens is that contractual process is the mechanism that's used for the DTCC and ultimately Cede Company as being the sole registered shareholder of each company. It is the process used to take the virgin equity stock, transfer it without the public's knowledge into the ownership and control of Cede Company, in return for which the American public is sold a derivative. A derivative is nothing more than a financial figment of your imagination. Why is it a figment of your imagination? Because no derivatives of any type have any asset of value backing those derivatives legally as collateral. So it's blue sky. It's hot air. There's nothing there. So when a fellow like Zuckerberg puts together something that the public latches onto, falls in love with, and everybody wants to use his system, he's able to do what they call a pump and dump, and that is they use all kinds of marketing tools and emotional tools to drive the price of that stock way above where it should be based on its past financial performance. And they then sell that for large sums of money, and you as the American common Joe on the street think you're actually buying stock when you're not. Those are called beneficial ownership rights. We'll get into that. But the IPO is the predominant tool for companies. Now, governments use a different tool, same net effect, different names, but they do a bond issue, whether it's for a bridge or a dam or a lake or road repair. It's all the same thing. Now, the way it affects all of you listeners who own homes is very simple. I'm sure that there are a number of you listening that have attempted, either through litigation, as I'm doing on a large scale, or just in an investigatory process, you've attempted to try to find out who the heck the real lender was, where are your documents, what's happened. Those are very important issues, but they are relatively minor if they are taken in concert or in concept with the overall scheme of things. What we're getting ready to talk about is why you haven't had it or not been able to get any satisfactory gratification answers, and much less proof of any answers that you're given that could be proven to be true. So you're given answers, it's all a facade. And the reason is because Cede Company has bought the securities, which are trusts, which we'll get into later. Won't come up in today's program, but it will next week, or the next show, I mean. The RENEGADE Trust, the Real Estate Mortgage Investment Conduit Trust, into which the majority of the 70 million mortgages controlled in whole or in part by Fannie Mae, which is the federal government, were put into these RENEGADE trusts into which the mortgage documents were transferred to. They then issue RENEGADE certificates. Those certificates do not represent direct ownership of your home. They represent pro rata ownerships, normally in $25,000 or larger increments, in the trust into which your mortgage was placed. Because they are a security and represent ownership of the RENEGADE Trust, that means those securities end up at Cede & Company. That means that Cede & Company owns the RENEGADE Trust, just as in my case, on which we have all the information which will be posted. Just as in your case, you may not have the information yet, but we can get it. The point of it is this. The trust into which your mortgage was placed is owned initially by the trust, but the trust almost instantaneously sells its RENEGADE Trust certificates on the stock exchange. When that happens, Cede & Company owns all of those trust certificates because they're a registered security. At that point, the fact that you would say, well, the trust really owns my home, no, it doesn't. Cede & Company owns the trust. So whatever assets, valuable or valueless, that are owned by the trust, that ownership actually resides with Cede & Company. Now, by SEC law and Wall Street procedures, which are taken from SEC law, before the IPO is released for sale, a binding, these are requirements, these are not options, these are not vagaries. And when you look at the evidence, you'll see the actual language that corroborates these points. A binding contract must be executed with at least one Wall Street exchange. The insert there is that all exchanges are owned by the DTCC. After that contract is executed, but still prior to the IPO being released for sale to the public, all original hard copy equity shares representing the actual equity ownership and the assets of the company conducting the IPO must be physically delivered to the exchanges that are conducting the IPO. So I don't want to be too wordy, but I want you to understand crystal clear that what's happening here is there is an absolute provable criminal cabal in which party A lies, party B implements the lie, and party C corroborates the lie that A and B both perpetrated. This is a closed community. There's no oversight. There's no regulatory intrusion by the feds to keep these people under control. They are absolutely operating with wild abandon. That is why over the last few years, when you hear all the other fast-talking commentators say, well, they're just gambling. Well, a lot of people come to me and say, I hear that all the time. What in the devil does that mean? That's what it means. It means that you have people taking your money and assets and your actual life force, because without you working and using your skills to make money and paying on your mortgages, they wouldn't have anything. So what they're doing is they've developed through Wall Street a complete closed-loop system whereby there is no external controls of any kind placed on them. Now, they'll tell you that's not true because they say, well, we have to comply with SEC requirements. Next show or two, you're going to understand how that's just totally hocus pocus. It's not true. After the receipt of the original equity shares by the exchange, I'm going to slow down a little bit because this gets a little detailed, but the exchange then declares itself as the sole depository for all hard copy shares. That means for a short period of time, the exchange is now the legal owner of that company. Why? Because they own 100% and are in possession of 100% of the actual equity shares that were developed originally by the company before it got into this public arena. At this point, the common man's, that's you and me, the common man's ability to actually own equity shares in the company ceases to exist. So from this point forward, everything that you're told is an abject misrepresentation and a lie. Now, pursuant to the Securities Act of 1934 as amended, the SEC notifies the exchange that the exchange is not allowed to simultaneously own and trade the equity shares. That also is a ruse, because the concept behind that law being in place is to attempt to infer the fact that the SEC is trying to eliminate conflicts of interest. That would, on the surface, that would sound reasonable and would sound to be a good thing, but that's not where it stops. The SEC simultaneously notifies the exchange that the exchange can transfer the ownership of the equity shares to the nominee, there's that word again, to the nominee of the exchange. As the sole nominee for all exchanges on Wall Street, the equity shares are transferred to Cede & Company. At that point, the initial legal loop of Cede & Company becoming the actual owner of the company is now complete. But that's in the role as nominee. Now, depending upon how fast their computers spit out data, which is at light speed, they only stay as the nominee for a very brief period of time. Cede & Company then becomes the sole registered shareholder of the company. So they go from being the receiver through the DTC as the holder of those shares immediately to being the nominee as the resultant of a transfer of those shares from the sole repository, being the DTC, to instantaneously becoming the sole registered shareholder of the company. Now, the exchange itself retains the physical custody of the equity shares during the IPO period. That's kind of a minute technical detail, but it's important in regards to the role it ultimately plays at the end of the IPO offering and what happens to Cede & Company. Now, Cede & Company, being the sole registered shareholder, and for the purpose of giving in return to the exchange, since the exchange cannot sell the actual equity shares because that works counter to the intent of the entire plan, which is have Cede & Company end up being the owner of everything without you knowing it, so that when you buy a share of stock, you're not buying that share of stock. You'll understand that before we're done. And for the purpose of giving the exchange something to sell as a shill commodity, Cede & Company creates one or more, think of that, one or two or three, based upon the size of the offering in $500 million increments. So that means if you had a $1.5 billion offering, they would issue 3 certificates. Compare that to what you're told when a major public corporation says, we have 10 million shareholders. Baloney. Here's what really happens. The Securities Act of 1934, as amended, requires that all traded shares must be delivered to the buyer in 1 to 3 days. Well, just think about it. There's no way, if what we were being told was true, that that could happen, if for no other reason because of the magnitude of the volume of the paperwork that have to be done. So therefore, here's what transpires. Cede & Company generates and electronically trades a new document which they term the street name stock on the DTC-owned exchange. The street name stock is the first derivative. Why? Because the street name stock is what is theoretically sold to you, but in reality it's not. It is kept within the closed loop of the system. Cede & Company, that owns all the equity shares of the company, creates an electronic-only document called a street name stock. Now, under law and Wall Street procedure, it specifically states that that street name stock can only be sold or transferred to members of the exchange on which the offering, one or more, is being conducted. So what that says is that Cede & Company takes the equity shares and they're done. They're off the market forever. Then what they do is they generate a street name stock, which is an electronic-only figment or derivative of ownership, and they sell that in portions, 1%, 5%, whatever an individual member that is allowed to trade on that exchange, they sell that street name stock back to those members. The DTC keeps all of its trading protocols, which if they didn't, we might have been able to find this out 50 years ago. The DTC keeps its trading protocols private, such that outside parties, you and me, are precluded from discovering what goes on behind closed doors and keeps the public from becoming aware of these illegal acts. Now, what the good criminal does, most good criminals are not stupid. They may be evilly motivated, but a lot of them are pretty dead dumb smart. And what they do is because of their ownership of financial influence over politicians, governments, and the rest of the agencies that work on behalf of the government, influence what goes on. So they get these rules passed which make it seem like they are operating under the protection of laws when in fact those very laws are put into place for one reason, and that's to keep from you, the public, knowing is it only sell its electronic street name stock to direct and indirect members of the DTC on the DTC-owned exchange trading floor. Members of the DTC, this will blow your mind, may only trade and sell their electronic street name stock, one, to other DTC members, or back to Cede & Company.
That's incredible. So,
or
Greg,
back,
basically is that's incredible bit of information. I hope people really got that. So everybody that's buying and selling stocks are buying the fictitious electronic street name that they're trading amongst themselves. Correct?
Not actually. That's the, well, practically no. Strategically, that's what they want you to think. But here's what really happens. Let me make that last statement again. I'll give you a short answer. By written contract, Cede & Company may only sell its electronic street name stock to members of the DTC or back to itself. So what that means is they generate the street name stock and they sell it back to their members, or the members sell it back to them. The net result of that is that the street name stock always stays within the closed paradigm of entities that are owned and controlled by the DTCC. Now, what they're actually selling to you is what are called beneficial ownership rights.
Bingo.
What are beneficial ownership rights? Beneficial ownership rights are only available to and are always held by Cede & Company as the sole registered shareholder. Beneficial ownership rights represent a right to vote by proxy, the guy in the street, when that proxy is only authorized by the registered shareholder. Beneficial ownership rights are revocable and cancelable, which means those rights which you may be receiving a return on your General Motors stock at this point, and you think this guy's a lunatic. I'll get into why you think that's a crazy statement, when in fact it's absolutely what the true situation is, because those rights can be canceled without recourse at any point in time without any notification, as stated in the stock agreements. Now, what that means is that to keep a financial revolution from becoming discoverable and then turn into a true revolution, at least financially, what they do is they will sell the impression, which is the third derivative, because you're not really even buying the street name stock. What you're doing is you are compensating the seller of the street name stock, which is the DTC exchange member, your broker. He is selling to you what you think is a piece of stock, when in fact what he's doing is he is selling to you the temporary and revocable, cancelable at any time beneficial ownership rights, which allow you to expect to receive the net majority, not the gross majority, the net majority, meaning net of fees and internal commissions, of any declared and subsequently paid dividend. So at any point in time, if the powers that be that sit in the City of London that control the DTCC wanted to, they could terminate the issuance of the beneficial ownership rights, which always reside in the ownership and control of the sole registered shareholder by contract. That's Cede & Company. Now, at any point in time, they could terminate those, and the dividend that you would expect would no longer and would not further be received by you. Now, that's extremely important because that clarifies the difference between the actual and perceived ownership of the equity shares, which actually represent ownership in the company. Now, that is the basis. That's the very tip of the pyramid. And that's where I wanted to get to today. So thank God we got there. But here's the point. That's the tip of the pyramid, because now you have a closed-loop system without any oversight or public visibility. They've been able to bilk or steal from the company. And, of course, the people at the company don't fuss because they just got tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, so they're all off buying houses and cars and boats and traveling around the world thinking life is great, when in reality what's happened is that their stock has been taken from them, never to be seen again. Now, at that point, it's all inside the closed system over which there's no government oversight, no regulatory or agency oversight, and there certainly isn't any knowledge by the public of what's going on. So at that juncture, what position are we in? Cede's got control of the stock. They issue at least two derivatives, the first one being the street name stock, and the second one being the perception of the issuance of beneficial ownership rights to the common man who buys a share of stock at some ticker price. At that point, the only thing that keeps people from, I think, going into the street is the fact that if dividends are declared, those people receive their net majority percentage of those declared and paid dividends. So that leaves the impression in the minds of the common man that the system is working the way it should work. Now, they will buy your stock back if you sell it, but remember that's done because at any point in time, if there was a rush on the stock or there was a significant percentage of the population that wanted to buy a reasonable sell off a reasonable percentage of stock in a given entity, if those sales were not conducted, that's going to tell everybody something's wrong. So that type of transaction in terms of the normal trading activity is taken into consideration by the system 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Never shuts down. So they expect to have to give people some money back based upon what the individual wants to do. Because if they ever refuse to sell off a piece of stock at the going ticker price, you'd have millions of people saying, what the devil's going on? That would blow the entire scheme. What questions where should we go from here, V? That's section one.
That's bombshell information, Greg. That's absolutely bombshell information. I guess we can go to the next part of what you want to talk about is why don't you detail for us, you already done an exemplary job of detailing for us who really owns the stocks. Why don't we, I guess if you want to lay out the agenda, so to speak, and also speak about what's going on with you guys and your team that you have assembled and how things are progressing with the actions that you guys are taking against the system.
All right.
Or however way you want, Greg. Entirely up to you.
I appreciate it. I'm watching the time here. I know we're getting short. Here's what the real goal is here. When V was so gracious to say that he was committed to helping us get this information out, I think it's of paramount import that we're at a divining moment here. Like a divining rod. We're coming up on some real serious occurrences in the financial marketplace in the next 12 to 24 months, in my opinion. We've got to come together as a nation of homeowners. And as this is some intrusion, I know, maybe on your end as well. You'll have to tell me that, but I know we're having it on our end. We're at a point where we've got to get high behind here. We've been talking about this for so long, I feel like we're screaming out in the wilderness and nobody's hearing. We've got the information now, we've got the evidence to be able to get this evidence into court, which is what I've been trying to do on my own now since 2011 officially, to get some judge, some jury somewhere to allow us to present this evidence which will uncover these things that are taking place, which are causing the financial ruin in our country. Now, we've made a lot of progress. We're not there yet. It's a continual fight every day. But we're making a lot of progress legally because they can't get us to go away. I'm not, if you don't want to, just say so. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I think it might be of help to try to, I don't want to scare anybody, but I want people to understand how serious we are, and the only way I know to do that, just be flat out honest and tell people, would you be willing to explain to people what you have found out about me on their target, absolutely with no influence for me, so that people can understand how serious this information is? Would you be willing to address that for a minute?
Absolutely. Folks, the reason why I had Greg on before, I'm having him on again, and we're, wrestling through this whole deluge of information and making it as real as possible. And look, this is not easy information. This is the most deepest information you'll ever hear in your entire life on radio. This is a PhD level course so far in economics and how markets really work here, folks. So bear with us, but it's important that you pay attention. Now, Greg's case, his crusade has been making such waves in the multiple advancements that he's been getting and small victories in courtrooms that he's getting. Now it's to the point where literally Greg is just one step away. Him and his team are one step away from being in the Supreme Court. Okay, their court's been their case has been pushed all the way up to the Second Circuit Court right here in the Southern District of New York, and they have everything it takes. So it takes people like you to get involved, and Greg will share that for you. But in terms of what real impact there is, well, folks, I'll tell you straight up from my sources that there are rumblings within the boardrooms of Mr. Greg Morse. There are some very key individuals who are concerned deeply about what Greg is doing because they are concerned that Mr. Morse will crack open the Ponzi scheme that's been running very effectively for the last 100 years and has really cranked it up in the last 40-some-odd years. And in the last 7 years, it's been the most acute phase. So, folks, what Greg is doing, and these are the things that the people, that the powers that be are worried about, Greg is really starting to mess with their exit strategy. And Greg's, because of that, I mean, Greg's been threatened. I mean, there's a whole bunch of, things that have gone his way against him. He is in the fight of his life. He is fighting pretty much taking the entire population of the United States, everything that we stand as a country in terms of our liberties, our right to own property, putting it on his back and facing the enemy head on. And his work is so perennial, folks. I mean, you could have lots of guys out there talking about a lot of different things, a lot of different subjects. They won't even raise an eyebrow anywhere, okay? But Greg has the evidence. He has over 15,000 pages of evidence and that he's compiled throughout the years. And it's clear, detailed evidence that if it goes to the court, if it goes into the Supreme Court, these guys are scared to death about it. They don't want it because it is simply light to these cockroaches, and they don't want the light turned on. And that's why it's important that people hear what Greg's saying, but also get behind it. Don't just pass this off. Oh, this is great information. It is good entertainment. Don't do that. Be proactive. It's the time for you to be proactive with this information is now. Greg.
For me, I guess the bottom line, V, is that we are fighting such an uphill battle that all of the lawyers and all the self-proclaimed experts 3 years ago said we never get past the first 60 days. Now people are having a little different opinion. And the threats, the death threats, the break-ins, the vehicle vandalisms, and all the things that I'm not going to say on the radio that you're aware of have taken place. The reason that's important, am I afraid? Not a bit. I'm not afraid of that. What I am afraid of is that, and I'll be real honest about it, and I'm not going to pull any punches as you told people 2 weeks ago about what I'm like. I am more afraid that the American homeowning public, which represents 260 or so million people, 4.5 people a home, do the math. Mother, father, 2.5 kids per household, 70 million mortgages, roughly. That's over 280 million people. What I'm afraid of is that we're going to lose our country without even trying to fight for it because people have become cowardly. They're afraid. I don't blame you for being afraid, but don't give in to your fears. For any of us who have ever seen combat and things like that, you learn to deal with your fear. We've got to do something. Plead, beg, scream, holler, whatever we've got to do to wake people up to stand up and say, we may lose this because my position is identical with yours. We are not going to stop the impending crash. I don't think there's a snowball's chance in Hades that we can stop it, but I do know one thing. If I've got a plan, you can go to the website. There's a personal letter that I have written to each of you who are willing to take the time. I've signed it myself. I've got my home address, all my personal contact information on there, and in the days of the internet, You tell me someone else who goes that public. So I'm not hiding from anybody. What we have got to do is we've got to come together and file. And we can do it for a very small amount of money compared to what I have spent. We've got all the documents, we've got the evidence, and if we come together, we can together do things that very few of us have been blessed enough to have the ability to fund on our own. We can file civil RICO, Racketeer Influence Corrupt Organizations Act lawsuits all around the nation prior to the eventual financial bust and the balloon going up, such that we can chock block the court systems. If we have millions of people represented by these various civil RICO lawsuits, as I have schemed out and put on the website, we can, C-A-N, we can have a major positive influence on stopping, number one, the continued perpetuation of this crime. Let me give you an example. Go to the DTCC website. Take a little time and do some research and see what they claim. Here's 2 or 3 key points. They claim, and they definitely are, the world's largest transactor and seller of mortgage-backed securities on the planet. According to the Federal Reserve and the Census Bureau and GAO and a bunch of different sources, they estimate, as of the end of 2013, that there's roughly $13 trillion worth of residential mortgages at play in the country today. Now, if you go look at DTCC, they're selling right at or slightly more, and we're extrapolating the 2013 numbers, which is about 1.9 quadrillion. You remember I used the example of how high a stack of $1 bills would be for a quadrillion dollars. They're doing right at, if not slightly more, as of the end of 2014 upcoming, $2 quadrillion worth of mortgage-backed securities annually. They further go on and state that they do $1 trillion of securities a month. Well, let's just assume, since we're playing with so many numbers that are just beyond all of our comprehension, $1 trillion a month times 12 months is $12 trillion. Let's just say that's close enough for government work. We're playing hand grenades to some degree. That's equivalent to all the mortgages in play in the nation. That means that your mortgage is being sold a minimum of 1 time every month.
Wow.
I mean, once every year, excuse me. But in most cases, the mortgages have been so broken apart into so many different securities offerings that in my case, it's over 50 transactions on my house. And I never missed a payment, was never late, and I sued them. I went at them as a pro se plaintiff to try to stop the fraud, and I'm the only lawsuit that we can find federally regarding a mortgage-backed security issue and a broken chain of title, which is based in peonage and mortgage fraud. This is not a foreclosure case. So what am I saying? I'm saying that this corrupt criminal cabal has gotten so big, and there are so many people in the press, more in the mainstream, but I'm sad to say it. I think there is a trend to many people in the alternative media, internet, etc., except for people like thee, that actually want to get the true reality of the degree of harm and criminality behind all of this. I don't know anybody else in the alternative media who has the courage to allow this information to come out, associate his name with it, and actually give us the chance to outline names, dates, places, events, because we're going to go right at them. I've been hoping that in the last year or so, year and a half, that people would pick themselves up by the bootstraps, would contact us. We got a lot of different ways to get a hold of us. You can write me at the house. You can send us an email, and we'll get back with you.